The rain was coming down in sheets as I drove home from the hospital, the wipers of my old Volvo working overtime to clear the deluge. I was bone tired, the kind of tired that settles deep in your marrow after a particularly grueling shift. As an emergency room doctor in Manchester, it was par for the course, but tonight felt different. Tonight, a premonition, a knot of unease, tugged at the edge of my consciousness. My name is Alaric, and I'm 46 years old. My life until recently had been a comfortable, predictable rhythm. I met Bronte in medical school. She was studying to be a pediatrician, bright, ambitious, with a laugh that could fill a room. We married young, both driven by our careers but always finding time for each other, or so I thought. We bought a house in Didsbury, a leafy suburb of Manchester. It was nothing fancy, but it was home. We filled it with mismatched furniture, books overflowing from shelves, and the comforting aroma of Bronte's attempts at baking, which, bless her heart, were usually disastrous. There were no children. Bronte had always been ambivalent, and I frankly was too focused on my career to push the issue. It was a silent agreement, a path we'd unconsciously chosen together. As I pulled into the driveway, the house looked dark and still. Bronte was usually home before me, the warm glow of the living room a beacon in the Manchester gloom. I frowned, checking my watch. It was nearly 10 p.m. She knew I was working late tonight. I unlocked the front door, the familiar click echoing in the silence. "Bronte," I called out, my voice sounding hollow. No answer. I shrugged it off, assuming she'd fallen asleep upstairs. I kicked off my shoes, loosened my tie, and headed to the kitchen for a much-needed cup of tea. That's when I saw it. A note propped against the sugar bowl, written in Bronte's elegant, looping script. My stomach clenched. I picked it up, my hands suddenly clammy. "Alaric," it read. "We need to talk. I'm at the Midland Hotel. Room 312, the Midland Hotel. What in God's name would Bronte be doing at the Midland Hotel at this hour?" My mind raced, conjuring up a dozen scenarios, none of them good. A medical conference, a meeting with a colleague. But why the secrecy? Why not just tell me? The knot of unease tightened into a vice around my heart. I grabbed my car keys, ignoring the protestations of my exhausted body. The rain had intensified, blurring the streetlights into hazy halos. I drove mechanically, my mind a whirlwind of confusion and growing dread. The Midland Hotel was a grand, imposing building in the heart of the city, a relic of a bygone era. I parked haphazardly in front, ignoring the disapproving glare of the doorman. I rushed inside, my shoes squeaking on the polished marble floor. The lobby was hushed and opulent, filled with the murmur of quiet conversations and the clinking of glasses. I approached the reception desk, my voice barely a whisper. "I'm looking for Bronte. She's in room 312, the receptionist, a young woman with a bored expression, glanced at her computer screen. "Yes, sir. Room 312. She's expecting you." Expecting me? That was a lie. I hadn't told her I was coming. My heart hammered against my ribs. I forced a polite smile. "Thank you." I took the elevator to the third floor, the silence amplifying the frantic beat of my heart. The corridor was long and dimly lit, the air thick with the scent of stale perfume and expensive carpet. I walked slowly, deliberately towards room 312. Each step felt like wading through treacle. I stopped outside the door, my hand hovering over the handle. I took a deep breath, trying to calm my racing pulse. What was I about to find? What was Bronte about to tell me? I pushed the door open. The scene that greeted me was like a punch to the gut, a brutal, sickening blow that stole the air from my lungs. Bronte was in bed, not alone, with a man. Naked, the man was Callum, one of my colleagues from the hospital. A younger doctor, ambitious and arrogant, with a reputation for sleeping his way up the ladder. Time seemed to slow to a crawl. The rain hammered against the windows, a relentless, mocking soundtrack to my agony. Bronte and Callum stared at me, their faces a mixture of shock and guilt. Callum scrambled for the sheets, trying to cover his nakedness. Bronte just stared, her eyes wide with fear. I couldn't speak. I couldn't breathe. I just stood there, frozen, the image seared into my brain like a brand. The betrayal was so profound, so complete, that it felt like a physical wound. Finally, Bronte found her voice. "Alaric." "I can explain." Explain what? Explain how she could betray me so callously, so completely. Explain how she could sleep with a man I considered a friend, a colleague. explain how she could shatter my world into a million irreparable pieces. I turned and walked out of the room, the sound of Bronte's frantic apologies fading behind me. I stumbled back to the elevator, my legs feeling like lead. I didn't know where I was going, what I was going to do. All I knew was that my life, as I knew it, was over. The next few days were a blur of shock, anger, and disbelief. I moved out of the house, taking only a suitcase of clothes and a few personal belongings. I couldn't bear to be in the same space where she had so casually destroyed our marriage. I stayed in a small, anonymous hotel room, the kind favored by traveling salesmen and budget tourists. I spent my days wandering aimlessly through the streets of Manchester, a ghost in my own life. I couldn't eat, I couldn't sleep. The image of Bronte and Callum in that hotel room replayed in my mind like a broken record, each repetition more agonizing than the last. Bronte tried to contact me, leaving endless voicemails, sending pleading emails. I ignored them all. I couldn't face her. I couldn't bear to hear her lies, her excuses, her pathetic attempts at justification. Callum, predictably, avoided me. He skulked around the hospital, his eyes darting nervously whenever I was near. I wanted to confront him, to lash out, to inflict the same pain he had inflicted on me. But I knew that wouldn't solve anything. It would only make me feel worse. I confided in my friend, Aloan, a nurse at the hospital. She was a strong, pragmatic woman with a no-nonsense attitude and a fierce loyalty to her friends. She listened patiently as I poured out my heart, offering words of comfort and advice. "Alaric," she said gently, "you can't let this destroy you. Bronte made a mistake, a terrible mistake, but you can't let it define you. You're a good man, a talented doctor. You deserve better than this." Her words were like a lifeline, a glimmer of hope in the darkness. I knew she was right. I couldn't let Bronte's betrayal consume me. I had to find a way to move on, to rebuild my life. I started by focusing on my work. I threw myself into my job, working longer hours, taking on extra shifts. It was a distraction, a way to numb the pain. But it was also a reminder of who I was, of what I was capable of. I was a doctor, a healer. I could save lives, I could make a difference. Bronte couldn't take that away from me. I also started seeing a therapist. It was difficult at first, opening up to a stranger, delving into the depths of my pain. But it helped. It gave me a safe space to process my emotions, to understand what had happened, and to begin the slow, arduous process of healing. I learned that Bronte had been unhappy for a long time. She felt trapped, suffocated by our routine, by our unspoken agreement not to have children. She craved excitement, passion, something more than what our marriage had become. I understood her feelings to some extent. But that didn't excuse her actions. She could have talked to me, she could have sought help, she could have ended our marriage with dignity and respect. Instead, she chose to betray me, to humiliate me, to inflict the deepest possible wound. As the weeks turned into months, I started to feel a shift within me. The raw, searing pain began to subside, replaced by a dull ache. The anger began to fade, replaced by a quiet resignation. I realized that I couldn't change what had happened. I couldn't undo Bronte's betrayal, but I could control how I reacted to it. I could choose to be a victim, to wallow in my misery, to let it consume me. Or I could choose to be a survivor, to learn from my experience, to emerge stronger and more resilient. I chose to be a survivor. I filed for divorce. Bronte didn't contest it. She seemed genuinely remorseful, contrite. But it was too late. The trust was gone, the love was gone. There was nothing left to salvage. The divorce was finalized quickly and quietly. We divided our assets, sold the house in Didsbury, and went our separate ways. I never saw Bronte again. I heard through the grapevine that she and Callum had moved in together, that they were very happy. I didn't care. I had moved on. I had rebuilt my life. I bought a small flat in Castlefield, a trendy area of Manchester overlooking the canal. It was modern and minimalist, a stark contrast to the cluttered, cozy house I had shared with Bronte. It was my space, my sanctuary. I filled it with things that I loved: books, art, music. I started dating again, cautiously, tentatively. It was strange, navigating the world of online dating after so many years of marriage. But it was also exciting, a chance to meet new people, to explore new possibilities. I met a woman named Saoirse. She was an artist, vibrant and passionate, with a wicked sense of humor and a kind heart. We connected instantly. We shared a love of art, music, and good food. We spent hours wandering through galleries, listening to live music and cooking elaborate meals together. Saoirse understood my pain, my hesitation. She didn't push me, she didn't demand anything from me. She just offered her friendship, her support, and her love. Slowly, gradually, I began to trust again. I began to open my heart again. I began to believe that I could be happy again. One evening, as we were sitting by the canal, watching the boats drift by, Saoirse turned to me and said, "Alaric, I love you." I looked at her, my heart swelling with emotion. "I love you too, Saoirse," I said, my voice thick with sincerity. And in that moment I knew that I had truly moved on. Bronte's betrayal was still a part of my history, a scar on my heart, but it no longer defined me. I was no longer a victim. I was a survivor, and I was ready to embrace the future with all its possibilities and all its uncertainties. But the story doesn't end there. A few years later, I received a letter. It was postmarked from a small town in Ireland. The return address was unfamiliar. Curiosity piqued. I opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, handwritten in a shaky, unfamiliar script. "Alaric," it read. "I know this is a long shot, but I need your help. My name is Maura, and I'm Bronte's mother. Bronte is very sick. She has cancer, and she needs you." Cancer, Bronte. My first reaction was disbelief, then anger, then a grudging sense of pity. After all, despite everything, she had been a part of my life for a long time. I hesitated. Did I really want to get involved? Did I want to open up those old wounds, to revisit that painful chapter of my life? Saoirse, sensing my turmoil, encouraged me to go. "Do it for yourself, Alaric," she said, "to put it to rest." So I flew to Ireland. The small town was quaint and picturesque, nestled amidst rolling green hills. Maura met me at the airport, her face etched with worry and exhaustion. She thanked me profusely for coming. Bronte was staying in a small cottage on the outskirts of town. When I saw her, I was shocked. She was a shadow of her former self, gaunt and frail. The vibrant, ambitious woman I had known was gone, replaced by a pale, weakened version. She was surprised to see me, but she didn't apologize. She didn't make excuses. She just looked at me with a quiet, resigned acceptance. "Thank you for coming, Alaric," she said, her voice barely a whisper. I spent the next few days helping Maura care for Bronte. It was difficult, emotionally draining, but it was also strangely cathartic. We talked, not about the past, but about the present, about her illness, about her fears, about her regrets. I learned that her relationship with Callum had been short-lived. He had left her shortly after they moved in together, moving on to another ambitious young doctor. She had been alone ever since. As Bronte's health deteriorated, she became increasingly reflective. One evening she turned to me and said, "Alaric, I was wrong. I made a terrible mistake. I threw away something precious, and I've regretted it ever since." I didn't say anything. There was nothing to say. Her words were a validation, a confirmation of what I had always known. But they couldn't undo the past. They couldn't erase the pain. Bronte died a few days later, peacefully in her sleep. I attended her funeral, standing alongside Maura and a handful of other mourners. As I watched her coffin being lowered into the ground, I felt a profound sense of closure. I had forgiven her, not for her sake, but for my own. I had released the anger, the resentment, the bitterness. I had finally put the past to rest. I returned to Manchester, to Saoirse, to my life. I was no longer haunted by Bronte's betrayal. I was free. Free to love, free to live, free to be happy. But there was one final twist. A few weeks after the funeral, I received another letter from Maura. This time it contained a document, a DNA test report. I stared at it in disbelief. The report confirmed that Callum was not the father of Bronte's child. The father was me. I was stunned. Bronte had been pregnant when she cheated on me. She had carried my child, knowing that she was betraying me, knowing that she was potentially denying me the chance to be a father, and she had never told me. She had taken that secret to her grave. The revelation was like a second betrayal, a final, devastating blow. I felt a surge of anger, a renewed sense of grief. But this time it was different. This time I wasn't a victim. This time I was a father. I contacted a lawyer, and after a lengthy legal battle, I was granted custody of my son, Sion. He was 8 years old, a bright, sensitive boy who looked remarkably like Bronte. Raising Sion was the hardest thing I had ever done. I was a single father, juggling a demanding career with the responsibilities of parenthood. But it was also the most rewarding thing I had ever done. Sion filled a void in my life that I hadn't even realized was there. He brought joy, laughter, and a renewed sense of purpose. He was my son, my legacy, my future, and in the end, that's what mattered. Bronte's betrayal had been a tragedy, a painful chapter in my life, but it had also led me to something beautiful, something precious. It had led me to Sion, and for that I was grateful.